My girlfriend forgot our celebration dinner for her office party, but when I quietly moved out and stopped paying 70% of everything, she discovered what she really lost. Subscribe to the channel and like the video to see more stories like this 32 years old. That number represents years of building myself from nothing into something I'm genuinely proud of. My name is Marcus, and for the past 8 years I've been climbing the ladder at Davidson & Associates, one of Chicago's most prestigious marketing firms. My apartment in Lincoln Park isn't huge, but it's mine. Well, technically ours. And every piece of furniture, every monthly payment, every utility bill represents the life I've built with my own determination. I met Sarah 3 years ago at a coffee shop near my office. She was between jobs then, having just moved to Chicago from a small town in Wisconsin. And there was something refreshing about her small-town charm mixed with big city dreams. She had this laugh that could light up a room, and this way of making even the most mundane Tuesday feel like an adventure. Sarah found work as a coordinator at a local nonprofit about 6 months after we started dating. It wasn't glamorous, and the pay was. Well, let's just say nonprofit salaries in Chicago don't exactly cover Lincoln Park rent. But she loved the work, and I loved seeing her passionate about something. When she moved in with me after a year of dating, it felt natural. She contributed what she could, maybe 30% of our expenses, and I covered the rest. My salary at Davidson was good enough to handle it, and honestly, I didn't mind. When you care about someone, you want to see them succeed, right? The thing about relationships is that you fall into patterns without really noticing. Sarah would cook dinner twice a week. I'd handle the other 5 days. She'd do laundry on Sundays. I'd take care of groceries and utilities and rent. She'd plan fun weekend activities with her small budget. I'd cover the bigger expenses like our vacation to Mexico last winter, or the new laptop she needed when hers crashed. It felt balanced in its own way. My career at Davidson had been on a steady upward trajectory. I started as a junior account coordinator and worked my way up to senior marketing strategist. I put in the hours, took on the challenging clients, stayed late when projects demanded it. My boss, Patricia Wong, had been hinting for months that a promotion to marketing director was possible if I could land the Peterson Industries account, a manufacturing company looking to completely rebrand their image. For 3 months, I lived and breathed the Peterson proposal. I researched their company history, analyzed their market position, crafted presentation after presentation. Sarah would find me at our kitchen table at 11 p.m. surrounded by charts and graphs, and she'd bring me coffee and kiss the top of my head before heading to bed. Those were good moments. Those were the moments that made the 70-30 split feel like partnership rather than charity. The day I found out I'd landed the Peterson account, Patricia called me into her office with a smile I'd never seen before. "Marcus," she said, leaning back in her chair, "I've got news that's going to make your week, maybe your year." The promotion came with a title change to marketing director, a corner office with actual windows, and a salary increase that would bump my yearly income from $75,000 to $95,000, $20,000 more per year. In Chicago terms, that was the difference between living comfortably and living well. I walked out of that office feeling like I was floating. 3 years of 60-hour weeks, 3 years of proving myself, 3 years of being the guy who stayed late and came in early. It had all paid off. I immediately thought of Sarah. This promotion wasn't just mine, it was ours. It meant we could finally start talking about that bigger apartment she'd been eyeing in River North. It meant maybe she could take that ceramics class she'd mentioned wanting to try. It meant financial breathing room for both of us. I called her immediately. "Sarah, you're not going to believe this. I got it. I got the promotion." Her excitement was genuine and infectious. "Marcus, oh my God, I'm so proud of you. We have to celebrate. This is huge." We made plans for Friday night. Dinner at Alinea, the restaurant we talked about trying for special occasions but never quite justified the expense for. I made the reservation for 7:30, telling them it was a celebration. Sarah insisted she'd dress up, said she'd take a half day from work to get ready properly. We were both giddy with the kind of excitement that comes from achieving something you've worked toward for years. Friday afternoon, I left work early myself, one of the perks of the new position, Patricia had mentioned with a wink. I went home, showered, put on my best suit. The navy one Sarah always said made my eyes look incredible. I even stopped by the flower shop and picked up a small bouquet of white roses, her favorites. The reservation was for 7:30. I arrived at Alinea at 7:15, roses in hand, feeling like I was on top of the world. The hostess seated me at our table, a perfect spot with a view of the kitchen where we could watch the chefs work their magic. I ordered a bottle of champagne, the good stuff, because tonight was worth celebrating properly. 7:30 came and went. I texted Sarah, "I'm here, can't can't wait to see you. 7:45. I called. Straight to voicemail. 8 o'clock. The server approached politely, asking if I'd like to order an appetizer while waiting. I smiled and said we'd wait just a few more minutes. 8:15. 8:30. I was starting to feel the stares from other diners, the sympathetic looks from our server. The champagne sat unopened on the table, the roses wilting slightly in the restaurant's warm lighting. At 8:45, my phone finally buzzed with a text from Sarah. "Oh, I totally forgot about dinner tonight. I'm at the office party. Can we do this tomorrow instead?" I stared at that message for a full 30 seconds, read it twice, 3 times. I totally forgot about the biggest night of my career, about the celebration we'd planned together, about the reservation I'd made at the restaurant we'd dreamed about trying. I looked around the restaurant, couples sharing intimate conversations, families celebrating anniversaries, business partners closing deals over expensive wine. And there I was, alone at a table for 2, with unopened champagne and wilting roses. I typed back simply, "Don't worry about it." Then I asked for the check, paid for the champagne I never drank, and walked out into the Chicago night with 20,000 questions running through my mind. But one thought kept rising above the rest. If Sarah could forget the most important professional moment of my life for an office party she'd never even mentioned, what else was I just a convenient afterthought for? The walk home gave me plenty of time to think, and by the time I reached our apartment, I realized that "don't worry about it" might have been the most honest thing I'd said in months. Sarah came home at 2:15 in the morning, and I heard every footstep. I wasn't sleeping, hadn't even tried. I was sitting in our living room, still in my suit, the roses now completely wilted on the coffee table next to the unopened champagne bottle I'd brought home. She stumbled in, clearly having had more than a few drinks, her makeup smudged and her dress wrinkled. When she saw me sitting there, she stopped mid-step, her face cycling through confusion, recognition, and then something that might have been guilt. "Marcus, why are you still up? And why are you?" She looked at my suit, at the roses, at the champagne. The pieces clicked together slowly. "Oh shit. Oh Marcus, I'm so sorry. The dinner. I completely forgot," I finished for her. "Yeah, you mentioned that in your text." She kicked off her heels and sat down heavily on the couch next to me. "It wasn't like that. I mean, it was, but it wasn't intentional. Jennifer from accounting was leaving and everyone was going out, and I just got caught up in the moment. You know how it is." Actually, I didn't know how it was. In 3 years together, I had never once forgotten something important to Sarah. Not her birthday, not the anniversary of her father's death, not the day she found out she got her job. But I didn't say that. Instead, I said, "It's fine, Sarah. These things happen." But it wasn't fine, and things like this didn't just happen. That night was the first crack in a foundation I'd thought was solid. The next few weeks brought a clarity I hadn't been expecting. It was like someone had handed me glasses after years of blurry vision, and suddenly I could see patterns I'd been blind to. Sarah's approach to our shared expenses, for instance. I'd always framed it as her contributing what she could while I covered the rest. But looking at it more closely, I realized that Sarah never actually volunteered to pay more when she could. When she got a small raise 6 months ago, maybe $200 more per month, that money went toward a new wardrobe and yoga classes, not toward increasing her contribution to our shared life. When my car needed repairs last month, a $1,200 hit, I handled it without question. But when Sarah's laptop died, she automatically assumed I'd replace it, not asked. Assumed. The new MacBook Pro she wanted cost $1,800, and when I suggested maybe a less expensive option, she'd gotten genuinely upset. "Marcus, you know I need this for work, and we can afford it," she'd said. We, as if her $25,000 salary was equally responsible for our ability to afford an $1,800 laptop. I started paying attention to our conversations differently. How often Sarah talked about our apartment when describing it to friends, despite the fact that my name was the only one on the lease, and I paid nearly 3/4 of the rent. How she'd casually mention our vacation to Mexico when she'd contributed maybe $300 to the $1,500 trip. The Peterson Industries celebration at work was exactly the kind of event Sarah usually loved hearing about in detail. But when I tried to tell her about Patricia's speech about my promotion, about the team's reaction, about how the clients had specifically requested me for their next campaign, she was scrolling through Instagram on her phone. "That's great, babe," she said without looking up. "Oh, look at this. Jenny just got back from Cabo. Her pictures are amazing. 3 years of my life and my career milestone got the same attention as a coworker's vacation photos." The office party incident started making more sense too. Sarah had mentioned Jennifer from accounting maybe twice in 3 years. They weren't close friends, but a free party with free drinks and office gossip? That was worth abandoning the biggest celebration of my professional life. I found myself wondering what other plans she'd prioritize over our relationship if given the choice. Her sister's birthday over my family barbecue, a sale at Nordstrom over the concert tickets I'd bought us, a girls' night over the weekend getaway I'd been planning for months. The pattern became impossible to ignore. Sarah participated in our relationship when it was convenient and enjoyable, but the moment something more appealing came along, I became an afterthought. 2 weeks after the Alinea disaster, Sarah suggested we go out to dinner to celebrate my promotion properly. She'd found a new restaurant in River North that had been getting great reviews. It was a sweet gesture. Except when we got there, I realized it was the same restaurant her co-workers had been talking about wanting to try. She wasn't planning a celebration for me. She was using my promotion as an excuse to check out the trendy spot everyone at her office was buzzing about. During dinner, she spent 20 minutes taking photos of our food for Instagram, captioning them with things like, "Celebrating my amazing boyfriend's success," and "So proud of this one." The irony wasn't lost on me. She was more excited about posting about my achievement than she'd been about the achievement itself. That night, lying in bed next to her, I did some math. Not the financial kind I'd been avoiding thinking about, but the emotional kind. In 3 years together, I could count on one hand the number of times Sarah had sacrificed something she wanted for something I needed. But I could fill a notebook with examples of the opposite. When her college friend got married in Denver, I didn't hesitate to cover the flights and hotel, because I knew it was important to her. When my college friend got married in Portland, Sarah complained about the expense for weeks and suggested maybe I should go alone to save money. When she wanted to take a weekend pottery class, I encouraged her and paid the registration fee. When I mentioned wanting to take a photography workshop, she wondered aloud if it was really worth the money since I already had a good phone camera. When her sister needed help moving across town, we spent an entire Saturday with a rented U-Haul and my sore back. When my brother asked for help painting his new house, Sarah suddenly remembered she'd promised to help her coworker with something that day. The most painful realization was that I'd been telling myself this was partnership when it was really patronage. I was funding Sarah's lifestyle and receiving companionship in return, but companionship that came with conditions and limitations. 3 days later, Sarah came home excited about another work event, a networking happy hour that could be really good for her career. She was asking to borrow my car because parking downtown was expensive, and could I maybe pick up dinner since she'd be out late? I looked at her standing in our living room, in the apartment I paid for, asking to use the car I paid for, planning to skip the dinner I'd pay for, so she could advance the career that contributed 30% to our shared life. And I realized that "don't worry about it" was about to become the most expensive phrase Sarah had ever heard me say. The photography workshop I'd mentioned months ago, I signed up that night, and this time, I didn't ask for anyone's opinion about whether it was worth the money. The photography workshop was on a Saturday morning, and for the first time in months, I felt genuinely excited about something that was entirely mine. I left early, leaving Sarah sleeping in our bed, and spent 4 hours learning about composition and lighting with a group of strangers who had no expectations of me beyond showing up and participating. During the lunch break, I checked my phone to find 3 texts from Sarah. "Where did you go so early? Can you pick up groceries on your way home? We're out of everything. Also, my car is making that weird noise again. Can you take a look at it later?" I stared at those messages, each one a perfect example of how Sarah viewed our relationship. I was the solution to her problems, the answer to her inconveniences, the person who handled life's logistics so she didn't have to. I turned off my phone and enjoyed the rest of the workshop. When I got home that evening, groceries deliberately not purchased, Sarah was on the couch with her laptop, editing photos from the networking event she'd attended the night before. "How was your photography thing?" she asked without looking up. "Educational," I said, settling into the chair across from her instead of my usual spot next to her on the couch. "That's nice. Did you get groceries?" I looked, and we literally have nothing for dinner. "I forgot," I said, using her favorite phrase. I got caught up in the moment. She looked up then, finally giving me her full attention. "Seriously? I texted you hours ago." "These things happen," I replied, echoing her words from the Alinea night. Something flickered across her face. Confusion, maybe irritation. "Okay, well, should we order something then? I'm starving." "Sure," I said. "You can order whatever you want. I'm going to make myself a sandwich." I watched her process this. In 3 years, I had never once suggested we eat separately when we were both home. I had never once made her handle dinner logistics alone. The shift was subtle, but unmistakable. The real revelation came the following Tuesday. I was working late, finishing up some Peterson Industries follow-up, when I realized I'd left my laptop charger at home. I decided to swing by the apartment to grab it before heading back to the office. I used my key quietly, not wanting to disturb Sarah if she was sleeping, but she wasn't sleeping. She was on the phone, pacing around our living room, her voice carrying clearly down the hallway. "No, Mom, it's not like that. Marcus is. Well, he's stable, you know? Like, really stable. The apartment is amazing. He's got a great job, and he just got promoted. I'm not going to mess this up over some random guy." I froze in the doorway, my hand still on the door handle. "Of course I care about him," Sarah continued, "but it's not like I'm going to marry him tomorrow or anything. I'm 28, Mom. I can figure out what I want later. Right now, This works. I get to live in Lincoln Park. I don't have to stress about money. And Marcus is comfortable. 3 years of my life, and I was comfortable. Trust me, I know what I'm doing. Marcus isn't going anywhere. He's too invested in this whole thing to walk away now. And honestly, where else is he going to find someone who puts up with his work schedule and his boring hobbies? My boring hobbies. The photography workshop she'd barely acknowledged. The hiking trips she always found excuses to skip. The books I read that she never showed interest in discussing. Besides, Sarah's voice got quieter, but I could still hear every word. It's not like I'm using him. We're in a relationship. He chooses to pay for things. That's what boyfriends do when they make more money, right? It's not my fault he makes good money and I work for a nonprofit. The casual way she dismissed my financial contributions as just what boyfriends do hit me like a physical blow. 3 years of covering 70% of our shared life wasn't partnership or love. It was just expected boyfriend behavior. Look, Mom, I need to go. Marcus should be home soon, and I promised I'd cook dinner tonight. Love you. She hung up, and I heard her footsteps heading toward the kitchen. I stood in the hallway for another 30 seconds, processing what I'd just heard. Then I quietly backed out of the apartment, closed the door silently, and sat in my car in the parking garage. 3 years. 3 years of believing we were building something together, while Sarah saw me as a comfortable arrangement that worked for her until something better came along. 3 years of thinking my financial contributions were partnership, while she saw them as just standard boyfriend duties. The phrase, "Where else is he going to find someone who puts up with his work schedule and his boring hobbies?" kept playing in my head, as if she was doing me a favor by tolerating the parts of me that didn't directly benefit her. I thought about all the times I'd worked late and come home to find her already asleep, leaving me to eat dinner alone. I'd always told myself she was being understanding about my demanding career. Now I realized she simply didn't care enough to wait up. I thought about all the times I'd suggested activities I enjoyed, museums, hiking, concerts by bands I liked, and she'd either declined or spent the entire time making it clear she'd rather be somewhere else. I'd told myself we had different interests. Now I understood she was just enduring my boring hobbies as part of the comfortable arrangement. I sat in that car for 2 hours, making mental lists. All the vacation destinations I'd wanted to visit that Sarah had vetoed for being too outdoorsy or not Instagram-worthy. All the restaurants I'd wanted to try that weren't trendy enough for her social media. All the ways I'd gradually stopped suggesting things I enjoyed because her lack of enthusiasm was worse than just doing them alone. When I finally went back upstairs, Sarah had indeed cooked dinner. Pasta with jarred sauce, her go-to meal when she wanted credit for cooking without actually putting in effort. "There you are," she said brightly. "I was wondering where you disappeared to." "I made dinner." "Thanks," I said, sitting down at our small dining table. "It looks great." "So, I was thinking," Sarah said, settling into her chair. "My sister Emma is having a housewarming party next weekend. I know it's last minute, but I already told her we'd be there. It's going to be really fun. She's doing this whole cocktail party theme." 3 hours ago, I would have automatically said yes, mentally calculating the cost of a hostess gift, and probably offering to drive. Now I found myself asking, what day? "Saturday. Why?" "I have plans Saturday." Sarah's fork paused halfway to her mouth. "What plans?" "Personal plans." "Marcus, come on. This is my sister. You love Emma." I did love Emma. Emma was kind and genuine, and had never once made me feel like an ATM with legs. But Emma's housewarming party would mean a gift, gas money, probably picking up drinks to bring, and definitely listening to Sarah complain about the drive there and back. "I'm sure you'll have a great time," I said. "Send Emma my congratulations." "You're not coming?" "I told you I have plans." Sarah stared at me like I'd started speaking a foreign language. In 3 years, I had never once declined a family event. I had never once prioritized my own plans over her social obligations. "What's gotten into you lately?" she asked. "First the grocery thing, now this. Are you okay?" I looked at her across our table, in our apartment, eating the dinner she'd cooked with groceries I'd paid for, and I realized I was more okay than I'd been in months. "I'm fine," I said, just learning to prioritize what's important to me. The look on her face told me she had no idea that she wasn't on that list anymore, but she was about to find out exactly how much her comfortable arrangement was actually costing her. The breaking point came exactly 1 week later, and it wasn't dramatic or explosive. It was quietly devastating, which somehow made it worse. I had spent that week making very careful, very deliberate preparations. I researched apartments in my price range alone, not the inflated budget that came from splitting everything 70-30. I looked at places I could afford comfortably on my new salary without needing a roommate or a financial dependent. I also did something I'd never done before. I calculated exactly how how much money I'd spent on Sarah over the past 3 years. Not just rent and utilities, but everything. Vacations, dinners, her laptop, her car repairs, groceries, the yoga classes, the pottery workshop, the designer coffee maker she'd insisted we needed, the subscription services she'd added to our accounts. The number was staggering. $68,000. Over 3 years, I had essentially paid Sarah's rent, food, entertainment, and lifestyle costs, while she contributed maybe $15,000 to our shared expenses. I wasn't angry about the money itself. I'd spent it willingly, but I was furious about the illusion. For 3 years, I'd believed we were building something together, while I was actually just subsidizing Sarah's extended adolescence. The moment that changed everything happened on a Thursday evening. I came home from work to find Sarah on the couch with her laptop, but this time she wasn't editing photos or scrolling social media. She was online shopping. "Perfect timing," she said when I walked in. "I need your opinion on something." She turned the laptop toward me, and on the screen was a vacation rental in Tulum, Mexico. 7 days, beachfront villa, private pool. The kind of place that shows up in travel magazines. Emma's friend is getting married there in March, and I really want to go. Look at this place. Isn't it amazing? It's only $3,000 for the week, and flights are like $800 each. We could make it our spring vacation. I looked at the screen, at Sarah's excited face, at the casual way she'd said only $3,000, as if it were pocket change. "We?" I asked. "Obviously. You love Mexico, and you've been working so hard lately. You deserve a vacation." 3 months ago, I would have said yes immediately. I would have booked the flights and the villa and probably upgraded our seats without Sarah even asking. I would have told myself this was what partnerships were about, supporting each other's dreams and creating shared memories. But now, after hearing her phone conversation, after weeks of seeing our relationship clearly for the first time, I understood exactly what this was. This wasn't Sarah wanting to share a romantic vacation with me. This was Sarah finding an expensive experience she wanted and automatically assuming I'd pay for it because that's what I'd always done. "No," I said simply. Sarah blinked. "No to Tulum? We could look at other places if you don't like this one. No to us taking a vacation together." The silence that followed was deafening. Sarah closed the laptop slowly, her expression shifting from confusion to something approaching alarm. "What do you mean?" I sat down in the chair across from her, my position for the past week, maintaining distance while I figured out my next move. "I mean, I won't be taking any vacations with you, Sarah. I won't be paying for any more vacations with you." "Marcus, what is going on? You've been acting weird for weeks, and now you're saying you won't take vacations with me? Are we breaking up?" The question hung in the air between us. Were we breaking up? I realized that in my mind, we already had. The relationship had ended the night I heard her dismiss 3 years of my life as a convenient arrangement with a stable guy who wasn't going anywhere. "I overheard your phone conversation with your mom last Tuesday," I said. The color drained from Sarah's face instantly. She knew exactly which conversation I meant. "Marcus, I can explain. You called me stable and comfortable. You said I'm too invested to walk away. You told your mother you're not going to mess this up over some random guy, implying there's a random guy you're interested in. You said my hobbies are boring, and wondered where else I'd find someone who puts up with them." Each sentence hit her like a physical blow. I watched her face cycle through denial, panic, and then desperate calculation. "I didn't mean it like that. My mom was being judgmental about my choices, and I was defending our relationship in a way she'd understand. By describing me as a convenient arrangement? That's not what I said. You said I'm stable. I have a great job. You get to live in Lincoln Park without stressing about money, and I'm comfortable. You said it's not your fault I make good money and you work for a nonprofit, as if my paying for everything is just what boyfriends are supposed to do." Sarah was quiet for a long moment, and I could see her trying to figure out how to minimize the damage. "Marcus, I love you. I was just talking to my mom in a way that would make sense to her. You know how she is about practical things. Do you love me, Sarah? Or do you love what I provide for you? That's not fair. It's a simple question. If I made $30,000 a year and lived in a studio apartment in a less trendy neighborhood, would you still be here?" The pause before she answered told me everything I needed to know. "That's not. Our relationship isn't based on money. 70% of our shared expenses come from my income. You contribute maybe 25% of your salary to our life together, while I contribute nearly 60% of mine. When you got a raise, that money went to clothes and yoga classes, not to increasing your contribution to our partnership. When I mentioned wanting to take a photography workshop, you questioned if it was worth the money, but when you wanted an $1,800 laptop, you just assumed I'd buy it. I never asked you to pay for all those things. You didn't have to ask, you just assumed. And when I heard you on the phone, I realized that's exactly what you've been doing for 3 years, assuming I'll handle the adult responsibilities while you get to live like someone whose biggest concern is which Instagram filter makes her brunch look better. Sarah was crying now, but they weren't tears of heartbreak. They were tears of panic, the tears of someone watching their safety net disappear. So what are you saying? You want me to pay more rent? I can do that. I can contribute more. With what money? Sarah? You spend your entire paycheck every month on things that have nothing to do with our shared life. I'll budget better. I'll cancel the yoga classes. I'll shop less. Marcus, please, we can fix this. I looked at her sitting on our couch, the couch I'd bought, in the apartment I'd furnished, with tears streaming down her face because she was finally understanding that her comfortable arrangement was ending. The problem isn't your budgeting, Sarah. The problem is that you've spent 3 years thinking of me as a solution to your financial limitations rather than as a partner. You've spent 3 years taking my contributions for granted while treating my interests and priorities as secondary to yours. That's not true. You forgot the most important professional moment of my life because an office party was more appealing. You've never once planned something you knew I'd enjoy without me suggesting it first. You roll your eyes at my hobbies, you skip family events that matter to me, and you literally told your mother that you're not going to mess up your living situation over some random guy you're interested in. The last part hit hardest, and Sarah's face crumpled. There's no other guy, Marcus. There isn't. I was just talking. Maybe there isn't another guy right now, but there might be next month or next year, and when there is, you've already told me exactly how little our relationship means to you. I stood up, feeling calmer than I had in weeks. I'm moving out, Sarah. I've already found a place. I'll be gone by Sunday. Marcus, please, we can go to counseling. We can work this out. I'll change. You shouldn't have to change who you are for me, and I shouldn't have to fund who you are for you. As I walked toward our bedroom to start packing, Sarah called after me. Where am I supposed to live? I can't afford this place alone. I turned back to look at her one last time. That's not my problem anymore. You're an adult, Sarah. You'll figure it out. For the first time in 3 years, I meant what I said when I told her not to worry about it. The next 3 days were a masterclass in watching someone's entire reality crumble in real time. Friday morning, I woke up to find Sarah already dressed and sitting at our kitchen table with her laptop, surrounded by printed pages and sticky notes. She looked like she hadn't slept. I've been doing research, she announced before I'd even had coffee. I can get a roommate. Look, there are tons of people looking for places in Lincoln Park. I can probably get $800 a month, which would bring my portion down to something manageable. I poured my coffee and looked at the papers scattered across the table. Craigslist printouts, rental websites, budget calculations in Sarah's handwriting. The monthly rent was $1,800. Even with a roommate paying $800, Sarah would be responsible for $1,000, more than half her monthly income before taxes. That could work, I said neutrally, and watched her face light up with hope. Right? And I've been thinking about picking up freelance work too. Maybe some social media consulting or event planning. I have skills, you know. She did have skills. She was organized, creative, and good with people. But watching her suddenly discover the concept of side hustles now that her financial safety net was disappearing felt like watching someone realize they needed to learn to swim while the boat was already sinking. Friday evening, the first potential roommate came to look at the apartment. I stayed in the bedroom while Sarah gave the tour, but I could hear every word through our thin walls. So this would be your room, Sarah was saying, her voice unnaturally bright. It gets great light in the mornings, and there's a huge closet. The bathroom is right across the hall. What's the rent situation? The potential roommate asked. $800 a month, plus half utilities. Super reasonable for Lincoln Park. And you're the primary leaseholder? There was a pause. Actually, my boyfriend is. But he's moving out, so I'll be taking over the lease. Has the landlord approved the lease transfer? Another pause, longer this time. I'm working on that. After the potential roommate left, I found Sarah sitting on the couch, staring at her phone. How did it go? I asked. She seemed interested, but she asked about the lease transfer. Sarah looked up at me with something approaching panic. You've talked to the landlord about transferring it to me, right? I hadn't. In fact, I'd already spoken to the landlord about breaking the lease early, and he'd been surprisingly understanding given my 3 years of on-time payments and 0 complaints. But transferring an $1,800 lease to someone making $25,000 a year? That was a different conversation entirely. Sarah, you don't qualify for this lease on your income alone. What do you mean I don't qualify? The standard requirement is that your monthly income should be at least 3 times the rent. 3 times $1,800 is $5,400 a month. You make about $2,000. I watched her do the math in her head. Watched the realization hit that her apartment hunt wasn't going to be a matter of finding roommates. It was going to be a matter of finding somewhere she could actually afford to live. Saturday brought a parade of potential roommates, each one asking the same practical questions Sarah hadn't considered. Credit checks, lease transfers, security deposits, references, the adult logistics of housing that I'd been handling for 3 years while Sarah focused on the fun parts of apartment living, like decorating and hosting dinner parties. By Sunday morning, as I loaded the last of my belongings into the moving truck I'd rented, Sarah was sitting at the kitchen table with her head in her hands. None of them want to deal with the lease situation, she said without looking up, and the landlord wants to meet with me tomorrow about qualifying for the transfer. I set down the box I was carrying and looked at her. 3 days ago, she'd been confidently planning a $3,000 vacation to Mexico. Now she was discovering that adult life without a financial safety net was considerably more complicated than she'd realized. "What's your backup plan?" I asked. "I don't know." Her voice was small, defeated. "Maybe I can move in with Emma temporarily while I figure something out." Emma lived in a one-bedroom apartment in a neighborhood that was significantly less trendy than Lincoln Park. Emma also worked for a non-profit and understood what it meant to live within your means. The idea of Sarah moving in with her practical, budget-conscious sister was almost poetic. "That sounds like a good plan, Marcus." Sarah looked up at me, and for a moment she looked like the small-town girl I'd met 3 years ago, before Lincoln Park and yoga classes and casual $3,000 vacation plans. "I really am sorry about everything. I didn't realize how much you were doing, how much you were covering. I took it for granted." "I know," I said, and I meant it. But taking someone for granted for 3 years isn't the same as not realizing. You knew exactly what I was doing for you. You just didn't think about what would happen if I stopped. As I carried the last box down to the truck, my phone started buzzing with texts from Sarah's friends. Apparently, the news of our breakup was making the rounds in her social circle. "Jenny, OMG, Sarah told me what happened. Are you okay?" "Lisa, can't believe you just abandoned her like that. She's devastated." "Michelle, Sarah says you kicked her out with no warning. That's so cold." I turned off my phone and drove to my new apartment, a one-bedroom place in a quiet neighborhood, 15 minutes from work, with rent I could comfortably afford on my own. It was smaller than the Lincoln Park place, but it was entirely mine. Every piece of furniture, every monthly payment, every decision about how to spend my free time and my money. That evening, as I unpacked boxes in my new living room, I got a call from an unknown number. "Marcus, it's Emma, Sarah's sister." "Hi, Emma. Look, I know this is weird, but Sarah is at my place crying, and I'm trying to understand what happened. She says you just decided to break up out of nowhere and left her high and dry." I appreciated Emma's directness. She'd always been the more straightforward of the two sisters. "Did she tell you about the phone conversation I overheard?" "What phone conversation?" I gave Emma the abbreviated version. Sarah's call with their mother, the casual dismissal of our relationship as a convenient arrangement, the admission that she was staying with me for financial stability rather than love. Emma was quiet for a long moment. "She actually said that? Word for word." Jesus, Marcus, I had no idea. I mean, I knew she was living a lifestyle that seemed pretty expensive for her salary, but I figured you guys had worked out some kind of arrangement. We had. I just didn't realize I was the only one who thought it was based on love rather than convenience. She's been calling everyone, you know. Your friends, her friends, trying to get people to talk to you about giving her another chance. I'm not interested in another chance, Emma. 3 years was enough chances. I don't blame you. And honestly, maybe this is what she needs. Sarah's never had to actually support herself. Our parents paid for college. Then she moved straight in with you. She's 28 years old and she's never had to budget for rent and groceries and all the adult stuff everyone else figured out in their early 20s. After I hung up with Emma, I sat in my new apartment, surrounded by boxes and the quiet satisfaction of a decision well made. My phone had 17 missed calls from Sarah and about 30 text messages ranging from apologies to anger to desperate bargaining. I deleted them all without reading past the first few words. Monday morning brought the reality check Sarah had been avoiding. The landlord's meeting didn't go well. I heard about it through Emma, who called to give me updates I hadn't asked for, but found grimly satisfying. Sarah couldn't qualify for the lease transfer. She couldn't find a roommate willing to deal with the uncertainty. She couldn't afford a security deposit for a new place while still paying Lincoln Park rent through the end of the month. By Wednesday, she was officially moving in with Emma. Her yoga classes canceled, her lifestyle downsized to fit the reality of a $25,000 salary in an expensive city. And me? I was learning what it felt like to come home to an apartment where every decision was mine, every expense was planned, and every evening was spent doing exactly what I wanted to do without negotiating or compromising or funding someone else's version of the good life. For the first time in 3 years, I felt like I was living my own life instead of financing someone else's. 3 months later, I was living a life I didn't recognize, and I loved every minute of it. My new apartment had become exactly what I'd wanted it to be, a space that reflected my actual interests rather than a compromise between my preferences and someone else's Instagram aesthetic. I'd hung photographs I'd taken in my workshop on the walls, bought a bookshelf, and filled it with novels I'd been meaning to read, and set up a small home office where I could work on freelance projects that interested me. The extra money in my budget, the 70% that was no longer subsidizing someone else's lifestyle, had opened up possibilities I'd forgotten existed. I'd booked a solo trip to Iceland for photography, signed up for a hiking club, and even started taking guitar lessons, something I'd mentioned wanting to do years ago, but had abandoned when Sarah made it clear she wasn't interested in listening to me practice. Work had become more enjoyable too. Without the underlying stress of supporting 2 people on one promotion, I could take on projects because they excited me, rather than because they paid well. The Peterson Industries account had led to 3 more major clients, and Patricia had started talking about partnership track positions opening up next year. But the real revelation was how much energy I had when I wasn't constantly managing someone else's emotional and financial needs. I'd forgotten what it felt like to come home and have my evening be entirely my own. No negotiations about dinner plans, no discussions about weekend activities that somehow always ended up revolving around Sarah's social calendar, no mental calculations about whether we could afford whatever Sarah had decided she wanted that week. The first month after the breakup, Sarah had tried everything. She'd called, texted, shown up at my office, and even enlisted mutual friends to plead her case. The message was always the same. She'd learned her lesson. She understood now how much I'd been doing. She was ready to be a real partner. Emma had kept me loosely updated on Sarah's transition to actual financial independence. It hadn't been smooth. Living with Emma meant following Emma's budget-conscious lifestyle, cooking at home, shopping sales, choosing free activities over expensive entertainment. Sarah had lasted exactly 6 weeks before finding a studio apartment in a less trendy neighborhood that she could afford on her actual salary. She's been looking for a second job, Emma had told me during one of our occasional check-ins. Turns out living on $25,000 a year in Chicago is harder than she thought when someone else isn't covering most of your expenses. How's she handling it? Better than I expected, honestly. She's been doing some freelance event planning, picked up weekend shifts at a coffee shop. She's actually adulting for the first time in her life. I was glad Sarah was figuring things out, but I felt no desire to be part of that journey. The 3 years we'd spent together had taught me exactly what I didn't want in a relationship. Someone who saw me as a solution to their problems rather than a partner in building something together. The moment that crystallized everything happened on a Thursday evening in March. I was at a photography exhibition downtown, the kind of cultural event Sarah would have found boring, when my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Hi Marcus, this is Sarah. I got a new phone number. I wanted to let you know I'm doing really well. I have my own place now and I'm supporting myself completely. I've learned so much about what I took for granted. I'd love to talk if you're open to it." I looked at the message for a long moment, then deleted it and put my phone away. 6 months ago, I might have felt guilty about not responding, but now I understood that Sarah's growth and independence weren't my responsibility, just like her previous financial dependence hadn't been my obligation. A few weeks later, I ran into Jenny, one of Sarah's friends, at a coffee shop near my office. "Marcus, how are you? You look great." "Thanks, Jenny. I'm doing really well. I heard Sarah's been trying to reach you. She's been telling everyone how much she's changed, how she realizes what she lost. That's good for her. Don't you think everyone deserves a second chance?" I considered the question seriously. "Jenny, if someone spent 3 years taking your financial support for granted, dismissing your interests, and treating your relationship like a convenient arrangement, how many chances would you think they deserved?" Jenny looked uncomfortable when you put it like that. "I'm not angry with Sarah," I said, and realized I meant it. I hope she builds a good life for herself, but I'm not interested in being part of it. The truth was, I'd already moved on in ways that had nothing to do with Sarah. I'd started dating again, casually, with no pressure or timeline. I'd met Emma through my hiking club, an environmental lawyer who paid her own bills, planned her own adventures, and seemed genuinely interested in my boring hobbies. We'd been seeing each other for a month, and every interaction felt like a partnership between equals rather than a caretaking arrangement. Last week, Emma had suggested we take a weekend camping trip to Michigan. She'd already researched campsites, offered to split all costs down the middle, and seemed excited about the photography opportunities the trip would offer. The contrast with Sarah, who would have needed me to plan everything, pay for everything, and probably would have complained about the lack of cell service, was stark. As spring turned into summer, I got one final update from Emma, Sarah's sister, not the Emma I was dating. Sarah had gotten a promotion at her nonprofit and was doing well in her studio apartment. She'd also started dating someone, a teacher who, according to Emma, actually seems to appreciate that she's independent now. "She asks about you sometimes," Emma had said during our last conversation. "I think she's finally understanding what she lost." "I hope she's happy," I'd replied, and meant it. The year that followed taught me more about myself and what I wanted in a relationship than the previous 3 years combined. I learned that partnership meant 2 people choosing to build something together, not one person providing for another person's lifestyle. I learned that love shouldn't feel like charity, and support shouldn't feel like enabling. Most importantly, I learned that saying, "Don't worry about it," and meaning it, truly not caring about someone else's poor choices or their consequences, was one of the most liberating phrases in the English language. Today, I'm in a relationship with someone who brings as much to the table as I do. We split everything fairly, make decisions together, and both of our hobbies are interesting to each other. When we plan vacations, we both research options and both contribute financially. When one of us gets a promotion, the other person shows up to celebrate. Looking back, I realized the most expensive part of my relationship with Sarah wasn't the $68,000 I'd spent supporting her lifestyle. It was the 3 years I'd spent believing that carrying someone financially was the same as loving them, and that being taken for granted was better than being alone. Sarah taught me what I didn't want in a partner. For that lesson alone, maybe those 3 years weren't completely wasted after all. But I'll never again confuse convenience with love, or mistake someone's financial dependence for emotional commitment. And I'll never again let someone forget the most important moments of my life because they found something more entertaining to do. What do you think about this story? Have you ever found yourself supporting someone who took your generosity for granted? How do you know when financial support crosses the line from partnership into enabling? Share your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear about your experiences with relationships where the financial balance felt off. If this story resonated with you, please show your support by leaving a like and a comment. Thank you for reading, and thank you all for listening to my story.